During a recent run, I thought I'd check out this old interview with the author Chuck Palahniuk. I've always thought he was a pretty interesting guy. To be honest, my attention was dipping in and out of the conversation until around 30 minutes in, when Chuck said something that made me stop my jog and rewind.
I'm thinking of the Cardiff giant.
Okay.
The Cardiff giant.
I've lived in Cardiff for almost a decade, so I was pretty sure I would have heard about a local giant. Turns out, Cardiff is not only the capital city of Wales, it's also the name of a hamlet in New York State, which turned into a circus in 1869 when the locals uncovered a giant man, whose remains are kept in a farmer's museum to this day. So I immediately sent an email asking if I could buy one of their books on the topic, and they sent me one for free, even paid for the postage. I devoured Franco's thesis in one sitting, and just in case you're also curious about America's greatest hoax, this is what I learned. This story really starts here, in a small town called Ackley in Iowa, in 1866, with a cigar manufacturer called George Hull. Don't actually know who that is. That's not George Hull, just a man in Ackley in the 1800s who kind of matches the description. A confirmed scoundrel, Hull was over 6 feet tall, looked the part of a villain, with his black hair, mustache, and dressed in black from his shoes to his hat. Hull was in Ackley visiting his brother-in-law and ended up having a conversation with a visiting reverend about biblical references to giants. Apparently, there's a line in Genesis 6:4 that speaks of large beings that used to roam the land. Hull was an atheist and couldn't really understand how others believed in such a thing, but being a bit of a trickster, he spotted an opportunity. Hull hired a quarryman in Fort Dodge to dig out a 12-foot block of gypsum rock, which they spent 6 months sculpting to give it the appearance of a giant fossilized man that was 10 feet tall and weighed 2,990 pounds. A friend said the giant resembled Hull, which, well, it's not the nicest thing you can say to another man. They packed up their giant gypsum secret and it was shipped to Cardiff, where they buried it in Stub Newell's farm, a relative of Hull's. They kept it hidden there for over 1 year, where it sat just under the surface in a 5-foot grave. On October the 16th, 1869, workmen were hired to dig a well on Newell's farm. And what do you know? In the process, they made a massive discovery that turned the whole town upside down. And by the next day, word had already gotten around. People turned up to catch a glimpse of this strange giant creature, and they were the lucky ones because they got a free show. By Monday, Newell, under the instruction of George Hull, had placed a tent around the oddity and was charging 50 cents per entry. The giant oddity had a massive appeal, from believers who wanted to learn of its biblical significance to natural scientists inspired by the recent publication of Charles Darwin's Origin of Species. So many people felt confident they were on the precipice of a giant discovery. Between 300 and 500 people were visiting the site every day. At its peak, they sold 2,500 tickets in 24 hours. And the Newell farm is estimated to have made $12,000 from the constant interest in this giant petrified fossilized man. But it wasn't just Newell's farm turning a massive profit. Local newspapers were thriving thanks to these Cardiff giant headlines. Neighbouring farms saw this influx of people and were selling sweet cider and gingerbread to the passerbys. The hotels were full of tourists who'd come far and wide to see this giant oddity. But it was clever old George Hull who was said to make the biggest bucks. Likely sensing this could only go on for so long before the truth came out, he sold the majority of the rights to the giant to 3 local businessmen for $30,000. And then he disappeared. A very wise move, because soon after, in November, a paleontologist from Yale University called O.C. Marsh declared the giant man was in fact a giant fake, of very recent origin and decided humbug. So the giant understandably lost both its appeal and value, and was passed between owners for decades. In the late 40s, it ended up in the Farmers Museum in New York, where it still resides to this day. As Barbara Franco puts it in her thesis, it went from a household word and the greatest scientific discovery of the century. The Cardiff giant eventually sank to the level of a sideshow freak. But a pretty cool story nonetheless.